We are used to Ducks versus Dogs battling it out on the field for Pacific Northwest supremacy, but a different Ducks versus Dogs battle off the field has Oregon's attention right now. The green and yellow are built to finish strong here in 2025. Depth and versatility may be the biggest keys and the biggest strengths for this team coming up this season. This and a whole lot more coming up on an absolutely stacked edition of That Show Out West.
This place has everything. In fact, the grass is damn green in Eugene.
That performance deserves a holy wallawa.
It's a feeling you cannot explain.
This place is louder than any other venue in the Big Ten.
This program is staged to compete and to win championships.
Welcome to the Big Ten, Oregon.
Welcome to That Show Out West for That Team Out West, an unbiased, neutral observer's view of Oregon Ducks football. I'm Ted LeBrew. I am having the time of my life doing this show right now, man. I am having an absolute blast talking about Oregon football every single week, and it continues here on April 9th, 2025. Remember to follow the show on Twitter if you haven't already, at That Show Out West. We're on TikTok, we're on Instagram, Spotify. Apple's being a pain in the ass. I'm really hoping to get my podcast up on Apple very, very soon. Have gotten a lot of requests for that one. We are going to start today's show, you know the drill, on the way to Oregon City, on the Oregon recruiting trail. Get in your covered wagons, get in your stagecoaches. Let's get right into it with some of the top recruiting headlines right now. Now, ever since Tamahini Tupoi did flip over to USC, maybe Oregon is flipping where they're putting their chips as it pertains to the defensive line right now. Four-star defensive lineman Deuce Gerald out of the state of Georgia may be becoming a top priority for the Oregon Ducks. He hasn't visited Eugene in quite some time, but he is going to be on campus April 21st through April 23rd, and this is a big visit. Deuce recently trimmed down his schools to a top 10. Oregon was right there amongst that top 10 right now, and he is one of the top 6 defensive linemen in this class right now. Now, here's what I will say. I would love to see Oregon get, a lot like Tom was, right? That 300-pound nose tackle, defensive tackle, playing really a space eater that can do so many other things in the middle of the defensive line. I'm not sure if Deuce Gerald's is that guy right now. Deuce Gerald's provides a lot of athleticism on the defensive line. I love the way his tape looks. He's certainly a guy that could fit in really well to Tony Tuiotti's defensive line room right now. 6'1", 275 pounds. So he doesn't bring certainly maybe the most size that you would like. I know that this class already has Viliami Mawawa, who's going to be playing at Willamette this year. He's kind of that high 3-star, low 4-star, maybe a little bit of a developmental piece for a couple of years when he gets to Oregon to be able to maybe play at a higher level. But I would really like to see a bigger guy, maybe a higher profile type of guy in the middle. We'll see if they eventually get to that point, but having somebody like Tony Cumberland and potentially Deuce Gerald's in this class is very, very exciting. Like Gerald's is a similar weight of somebody like Tony Cumberland. Of course, Cumberland is a little bit taller at 6'4.5", and I mentioned Gerald sitting there at 6'1" right now. But this is like going into the Southeast is not easy. Now, they had success doing what they did with Naeem Offord during the 2025 cycle, but going down there continuously for top players that a lot of these Southeastern schools are interested in, it's going to get more difficult and more difficult and more difficult every single time. Oregon may be a little bit late to the party, but Gerald's had good things to say about Oregon and their staff right now. Cody Green and Emmanuel Iheanacho, two high-profile offensive tackles, were recently on campus for Oregon, and here's what I'll say about Emmanuel. Like when we just talked about, hey, it's going to be tough to go into the Southeast and maybe take some of those players continuously out of there. This is going to be a tough recruitment, I think, to get Emmanuel out of the DMV area. Maryland is setting the pace with this recruitment right now, according to some sources and some national guys over there at On3. So that's going to be another situation where it's going to be very difficult to get him out of that area. One thing that interests me, and something to maybe keep an eye on as it pertains to this Maryland guys, Mike Locksley did not have a great season last year. He won a grand total of one Big Ten game against the USC Trojans. Okay, this year, Maryland doesn't look that much better. Okay, if Maryland has another subpar year, if they do something like a 3-9 or a 4-8 again, is Mike Locksley in danger of losing his job? Then what happens to the Zion Elis? Then what happens to the Emmanuel Iannaccios? That's, I think, the very interesting thing that could happen just a few weeks before signing day, whether Maryland would wait till the end of the season, maybe it's mid-season. This is something to keep in mind. Certainly not saying it's going to happen. Certainly not predicting or projecting that it's going to happen. But, hey, we know Dan is as good a closer as anybody. Those are some guys right now that they're bringing in to that Terps program that are pretty good football players right now. And, as more time continues to go by, and I kind of read some of the reports and some of the quotes from Cody Green at his recent visit, the more confident I am that Oregon is really going to be able to seal the deal. And if you go on to On3, go on to Scoop Duck right now, read the report written over there by Max Torres about his recent visit, there's a little bit of a tidbit in there where Cody Green said Isaiah World at tackle was going toe-to-toe with Mateo Uiagalelei. That's a great thing to hear right now. And these are kind of some of the tidbits where spring practice isn't open to the media. So you got to dig and you got to search and you got to find these little tidbits. There's one from Cody Green's visit. So, hey, all is good, certainly on that front as well. Jackson Cantwell, when we talk about offensive tackles, right, Cantwell and Iannaccio is certainly the two that Oregon are very, very hot and very, very high on right now. Sounds like, according to On3, that Jackson Cantwell, I think he's got a final list of like top 5 or top 6 schools right now. There are 3 that are trending and maybe closing in on Jackson right now. The Miami Hurricanes, we know who coaches that program, the Georgia Bulldogs, and the Oregon Ducks. I feel really good about Jackson Cantwell right now. I love the connection. Of course, Dan Lanning, small-town Missouri guy. Jackson Cantwell, a small-town Missouri guy. But this is going to be a tough battle. It is going to be a war, and it is going to be one of many wars between the Oregon Ducks and the Georgia Bulldogs. Like, you look at a lot of these high-level recruitments that are going on right now, you see an O and you see a G, and this is going to be a Ducks versus Dogs battle and showdown for some of these top prospects going on as we get closer and closer to signing day at the end of next season in December. The history between these two, Dan Lanning and Kirby Smart, makes this recruiting battle even more interesting. Of course, Kirby is the guy that gave Dan Lanning an opportunity to show what he can be as a defensive coordinator. And then when he really showed that great 2021 defense where Georgia won a national championship, that gave Dan an opportunity to be a head coach. This is a mentor and a student type of relationship. We all know what happened when Dan became a head coach, his very first game against Georgia, and we know how that went. Oregon has certainly gotten better on the field since that matchup. And now Dan has built up his program and a defending Big Ten championship, and Georgia is still the king on the block. Kirby is still the big kid on the recruiting block right now. Like, when you look at the Georgia Bulldogs, the last 3 seasons, Georgia has either had the number 1 class in the country or the number 2 class in the country. They are one of few schools, a handful of schools that have been consistently been able to recruit on the same level or better than the Oregon Ducks the last few seasons. So you combine the Dan and Kirby relationship, which you got to imagine that there is a mutual respect, but also a mutual competitiveness. You want to be recognized. You want to be acknowledged like the tribal chief, right? That's where Dan Lanning certainly wants to be in these battles with Georgia going on down the pike. There's one battle that I think is going to be bigger than all the others, and I think it's going to be a big pivot point, and it could be a determining factor which school ends up number one, maybe when all is said and done, and that's Jared Curtis. We know he is set to commit to either the Georgia Bulldogs or the Oregon Ducks sitting there on May 5th. Like, there are so many. If you're a message board warrior, okay, and I'm on Scoop Duck every day, okay, and you're going over to the Georgia board, you're going over to the Oregon board, you can drive yourself crazy looking at updates from either of these two message boards. Both of these head coaches are all in. And this is really because we've got a commitment date coming up for Jared. I think that really makes this a little bit more high profile, especially in the next month to come. But this is going to be a recruitment, and this commitment of Jared Curtis is really going to possibly define which way these classes really go in the future, because his commitment will turn heads. His commitment will maybe get other people to maybe slide one way or the other. Okay, if you have a Jared Curtis commitment, you're sitting out there in the state of Missouri, and if you're Jackson Cantwell, you'd be like, yeah, I'd love to play with Jared Curtis. I would love to protect the number one quarterback in this class right now. So that's one, man, that I would love to see Oregon win. Is it the absolutely end of the world if they don't? Maybe not, but I've kind of talked before about how important it would be for Oregon to land a 5-star quarterback out there. This is the biggest Dan versus Kirby battle. It's going to go all the way to the end, and people say it's neck and neck and could certainly go either way right now. I think if you're Dan Lanning in these recruitments against the Georgia Bulldogs, you need to sell Oregon as the new Georgia and the better Georgia. Now, we are so used to Georgia just being a dominant program, winning SEC titles, winning national titles. It never used to be that way. Okay? Before Kirby won his first national championship over there at Georgia, the Bulldogs had just won one AP national championship in their history, and that came in 1980. Under Mark Richt, this was a program that came oh so close so many times. Sound familiar? Sounds a lot like the Oregon Ducks, but when they eventually cracked through, when Kirby Smart eventually won that national championship, one turned into a ton. And I feel like that's how this is with Oregon, right? They've been knocking on the door for so many years to be able to kick down that national championship door. But I feel like once they kick down the door, once they get in that room, that's going to be a giant monkey off of their back. A lot of rival fan bases are going to have nothing to talk about during the offseason. That's the whole mantra during these spring and summer months, when the trash talk, of course, is going back and forth on the Twitter sphere. But that's how I feel about Oregon. I think that they are in a similar position. Like Clemson is another one of those programs. Remember the term Clemsoning out there? They'd get off to a hot start and they would crumble or in some of these big games, and they wouldn't be able to get themselves into a national championship position. But once Clemson won a national championship, right? They won multiple national championships. I believe Oregon is certainly in that mold to possibly be the next of those teams to really break through into that top national championship type of upper echelon in college football. And when you take a look at the makeup right now, like Georgia, great defensive line, great offensive line, great run game. I say the newer Georgia, but I also say the better Georgia, really for offensive talent, right? Quarterback. Of course, we just talked about the recruitment of Jared Curtis, okay? When you talk about these two teams, like, I know there's distance, and I know there's other factors in a recruitment. Money, of course, is certainly one of those as well. But Oregon is certainly sitting in a much better offensive situation. They've put a better offensive production than the Georgia Bulldogs. That's a very powerful program. It's a very smash mouth type of program. But when you look at Oregon, this is a more explosive offensive program. So if you're like a wide receiver, say like, I don't know, DeCorian Moore. If you're a quarterback coming in like Dante Moore, you can see why those types of players would go to somewhere like Oregon. And that's what makes this Jared Curtis recruitment so freaking interesting, is because you have the proximity from Nashville down to Athens, Georgia, and that with the Bulldogs. And then you have the offensive prowess that Oregon has been able to do, and the type of talent that they've been able to really put into the next level, and the type of offenses that they've been able to have these last couple of years in Eugene, Oregon. So Oregon needs to continue to really sell that. They're making strides defensively, but man, Georgia is still a great defensive entrenched program, certainly right now as well. Out of all of the players, I think that this Oregon and Georgia battle exists in, like you look at Jared Curtis, right? Those are the top two. Jackson Cantwell, right? 2 out of the top 3 Georgia and Oregon are for that one right now. Brandon Arrington in the state of California, defensive back. Georgia and Oregon are in his top 6 right now. I think the toughest for Oregon, the toughest battle that they're going to have is Tyler Atkinson. Tyler Atkinson is a 5-star linebacker out of the state of Georgia. And here's the thing, like Oregon has gotten 5-star guys at a lot of different positions. Linebacker is one where they haven't gotten that truly elite player. Tyler Atkinson, who had a really good first visit to Oregon within the last month. So that certainly is in a really good spot right now. But that's going to be a really tough bowl. Getting a 5-star linebacker out of the state of Georgia in Kirby Smart's backyard, that's going to be challenging. Like we found out last year when USC got commitments from the defensive line. We know Kirby Smart is all about defense. Okay, from the state of Georgia, they didn't last very long. So that is going to be the toughest pull. That is going to be the biggest battle. I am looking forward to Ducks versus the Georgia Dogs on the recruiting trail and the battles, and see which ways they go. One thing Oregon has done a phenomenal job at is assistant coach retainment. There wasn't a ton of changes in this Oregon coaching staff, but there was one significant change. Junior Adams leaving the Oregon wide receivers coach post to be the new wide receivers coach over with the Dallas Cowboys, and in comes Ross Douglas. When we saw Ross come in, we saw his age, we saw kind of his track record. Saw he coached with the New England Patriots. He's got that Patriot way under Bill Belichick over there. And then we saw what that offense was able to do at Syracuse. And you put it all together and like, this appears to be another really, really good young coaching hire by Dan Lanning. And I think that this is going to be yet another, indeed, it's going to be proven to be another really good young coaching hire by the Danimal in charge of this program. But we didn't really know that much about Ross, right? We're just kind of connecting. There's different dots out there, and we're connecting them and maybe making a conjecture of what we believe Ross Douglas will be. Tuesday, he stepped in front of the media for the very first time. We heard from Ross Douglas for the very first time. And when I heard him speak, he oozed confidence. He was oozing with that self-assurance. They talked about it on the Aughts and Audibles podcast, the 24/7 podcast for the Oregon Ducks, and they use that same term, self-assurance. Like he was asked a question that says, hey, do you think that you're going to receive a little bit of a recruiting boost, hey, having that O certainly on your chest? And he's like, well, yeah, I guess, but I believe in what I can do. I know that I have an elite ability, right? And he believed in himself. He had that dog in him, as some people certainly say out there as well. He talked about the job interview process as well. He's like, hey, I knew when I got an interview, I was going to get the job. Like, you love to see that mentality. You love to see that. Like when you look at Junior Adams, a little bit different. He had maybe that quiet leadership, a little bit of that quiet confidence to him. It's a little bit of a different story right now with Ross Douglas. And you know, when a new position coach comes into a room, I think it's a reset of sorts. Okay? Because I think, you know, when you have a position coach for a couple of years. He's kind of, with, of course, the guidance of Coach Lanning and Coach Stein, you kind of have a profile and you kind of know, when you've been around this coach for a couple of years, where maybe which direction certain players are going and certain directions that other players are going. When you bring in a new voice, when you bring in a new mind into this room, I think it's a reset. And I think that this is a big opportunity for a lot of guys in this room. There was one soundbite from Tuesday that oozes confidence and talks about opportunity and really ties in with what the blueprint could be for this Ducks offense in 2025.
Proud of what we were able to accomplish at Syracuse. You just look at the kids we had in the room. Kyle McCord, he kind of got dumped to the wayside at Ohio State after they lost to Michigan, and he was a guy who kind of went through the transfer portal process and didn't really have a home, and he had a home at Syracuse. And then the guys who I inherited in my room, it was a bunch of guys who were counted out, doubted, underappreciated, and really didn't have career statistics like Jackson Meeks. When he first he spent 3 years at Georgia. He had like 10 catches, 132 yards. Trevor Pena, he was at Syracuse for 4 years, had 20 catches, 270 yards or something like that. But, those guys, they stayed down. They trusted the plan. They put the work in, and it was a long process. But at the end of the day, those guys were truly bought in. They got better every single day, and we were able to have the best pass offense in the country. And I just hope to replicate that here. It's, again, kind of similar situation where, Evan Stewart returns, he has some production. Gary Bryant, he's played in his career before. Corey Moore, true freshman. J-Lo played a little bit last year. But it's a bunch of guys who might not have all the accolades and the stats and the All-Big Ten honors and things like that. But at the end of the day, these are talented players and they're willing to put the work in. So we're just focused on getting better every single day. So I hope to kind of replicate that same thing here at Oregon.
If I'm anybody outside of Evan Stewart and DeCorian Moore, and I hear that, and I look at that blueprint from at Syracuse, I'm excited because I think that this is a newfound opportunity. You look at I know he wasn't the coordinator. Okay, he wasn't scheming stuff up, but he was certainly still in the room. He's going to be the passing game coordinator as a part of his title at Oregon. He is going to be a big part, certainly, of this passing game and what it looks like and who gets a lion's share of the targets, of the receptions, of the snaps this particular season. And if I'm a guy like a Gary Bryant Jr., right, who he kind of took the podium on Tuesday as well, and he's back to full health. And what we have seen, what Gary Bryant can do, he can be a 500-yard, 4 or 5 touchdown receiver when he is fully healthy, coming off of an injury. There's an opportunity for him to really get back into the limelight as well. If I'm a Kyler Casper, like if I'm a Jeremiah McClellan, like we all know the Malik Benson who transferred in, like we all know the names. But there's one name that I actually, in the last show, talked about as maybe a possibility to even transfer out in the spring portal that I think brings a newfound opportunity that if he can really hit the ground running this spring, we've seen some social media clips of him, then maybe he can realize his potential with someone like Ross Douglas leading this room right now, and that's Jurion Dickey, a former 5-star recruit. Like, if he can be the outside receiver that Oregon is looking for, he's battled through some injuries, he's battled through some other things, certainly in his Oregon career. If he can be a guy that can really learn and that can really develop under Ross Douglas, this receiver room it goes from deep to crazy deep at that point. But hearing what I heard there from Ross, I think there is a tremendous opportunity for guys that maybe haven't seen the field a lot to really say, hey, everybody's on a level playing field this spring. There's a newfound opportunity. I can step up and be that guy going forward. The blueprint. Because when I look at Syracuse statistically last season, I see a blueprint of what the Ducks could be from a receiving standpoint. Now, it's worth saying this. Syracuse, of course, was the top passing attack in college football last season. Oregon had 100 more rushing attempts than Syracuse last year. So I think that Oregon is going to be a much more balanced offense than the Ducks, or than the Orange, were last year. Like, you saw 3 pass catchers over 900 yards. Break it down. Jackson Meeks, Douglas talked about him and the jump that he made coming in over 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns. Trevor Pena, 941 and 9 touchdowns. How about a tight end in Arande Gadsden, who has a similar-ish body frame of Kenyon Sadiq? He had 934 yards and 7 touchdowns. I think when we look at that top 3 and we break it down, why can't Oregon have a similar type of output? Why can't, in 2023, they had 2 1,000-yard receivers in Troy Franklin and Tez Johnson. Why can't you have DeCorian Moore up there? Why can't you have Evan Stewart as 1,000-yard receivers? Why can't you have someone like Kenyon Sadiq as an 800 or 900-yard receiver? And then why can't you have, whether it's Dickey, whether it's Benson, whether it's McClellan, whether it's Casper, really filling in as well? You have someone like Darrell Gill for Syracuse, 570 yards and 2 touchdowns. There were a handful of guys that were like in that 200 to 300 yard range as well. Like a lot of what I saw on this stat chart from Syracuse, I kind of looked at it and I said, this is a lot of what we could see at Oregon. I'm going to reiterate it and say Ross Douglas is not calling the plays. Okay? He's not maybe the final say drawing up the game plan, but he's going to have a big part on recommending which receivers that he feels has stood out in practice, that stood out in spring, that stood out in fall, that stands out on a week-to-week basis. I love the confidence that he is bringing to this room. I love the confidence that he portrays himself with. I think he provides an extra benefit to Oregon. I like guys that come in and don't say, hey, I mean, you of course want to have guys that love being at Oregon, but I love guys that say, I'm going to be a benefit to Oregon, not maybe that Oregon is going to be a benefit to me. I love that confidence. I love that self-assurance that those type of coaches certainly have. This is something very intriguing to keep an eye on. I'm all on the Ross Douglas train, baby. There's a lot of traits that a team needs to be a great football squad, but there are 2 traits when I look at this Oregon team that really stand out to me as 2 keys, 2 traits, 2 strengths going forward as we approach the 2025 season, and that being depth and versatility. The deeper that you are as a football team, the more versatile that you can be as a football team. I'm from the state of Minnesota. I'm living in the state of Minnesota. I'll use some hockey terminology. There's a lot of positions. There's a lot of position groups. There's a lot of position rooms on this Oregon team that can roll 2 lines deep, that can roll 3 lines deep, right? When you get to your backups, you feel good. At some positions, even when you get to your 3rd guy, you still feel pretty good that there won't be a significant drop-off when they go on the football field. There are a lot more deeper position groups on this Oregon team than there are thinner position groups. Like when I really look around and I maybe have questions about the depth, like linebacker and offensive line are really the only ones that I bring up. Like even a position like quarterback. You have a guy like Dante Moore. I've said about Austin Novosad. He can start for over 100 college football programs, but he's chosen to stay at Oregon. Recently listened to a podcast of him on Ducks of a Feather. I'm not sure if he's going anywhere anytime soon. You look at a position group like running back, a 3-headed monster like maybe Oregon hasn't had before with Mekhi Hughes, Noah Winnington, Dink Riggs. You've got great true freshmen, Jade Lamar, Jay Harris. Like that room is stacked. They have a stacked running back room. We've talked about how deep the secondary is with young players. Wide receiver and the battle that certainly goes on at that. And I've said in a previous edition, the highest viewed edition of TSOW, I've talked about how the defensive line is the deepest position group on this football team in 2025. And boy, if there is a position group that you would love to have depth at, it indeed is the defensive line, certainly as well. And why does this exist for Oregon? It exists because they have stacked top 5 class upon top 5 class upon top 5 class. And when guys come into Oregon, a lot of times they don't want to leave Oregon. Recently, defensive backs coach Chris Hampton and head coach Dan Lanning really talked about the versatility and how it's going to play into 2025 and how they like different guys being able to play a lot of different positions.
We talk about position versatility. With this group that we've got this year, I think it's more important than ever of guys knowing how to play multiple spots. Like Jaden's a guy that's played star. He's played safety. He played corner all last season, depending on the game for Ole Miss. Obviously, Dalen has done it. Solo has done it. Jaleel Florence is back moving around for us. He can do it for us. Tamon Davis. We've had a bunch of guys. Zach Grisham is doing it. And then we're going to get, some of our safeties learning as well. So that's kind of what we're doing. We're just rotating guys. In the spring, fall camp, we do a green, yellow. There's no depth chart. It's just all about PG, personal growth. And guys learning how to play multiple positions, and we want them to understand the scheme. So I may move them and I may challenge them. One day you're at corner, tomorrow you're a star. Okay, this rep you're a star. Hey, in 4 plays you're going to safety, and I expect you to know it because it may happen like that in the game.
Yeah, you got to be able to do it all, right? And that's one of Mateo's strengths is that he can do it all, right? There's 32 teams in the NFL. I want all 32 to want Mateo, right? And that's because he has position versatility. It doesn't matter if they're a 3-4 or 4 down front. He's a guy that can play a 6, a 4-eye. He's a guy that can line up and stand in space. And the same with Tatum. He's another guy with great experience. Same with Blake Purchase. Had a great spring so far. Seeing great growth from Elijah as well. And even young guys, Nas standing out. So the more that you can do for your team, the more valuable you are for our team. And those guys are guys that can do both.
Especially on the defensive side of the football. This is a team that, and you just heard it from those 2 coaches, and you've seen the examples of it on the field. This is a team that preaches versatility, that loves the utility player. They have so many different alignments that we've seen on the defensive side of the football. Like I've talked recently about the most underrated players for Oregon, and I think Tatum Tuioti is certainly that guy. Tatum certainly recently, I should say, had a press conference, and he talked about maybe the extra muscle that he's been able to put on. If he can retain that quickness, he could be an even bigger weapon. You gotta love what you heard from that specific soundbite from Dan Lanning about the edge room. Okay, we know that Mateo can play a lot of different techniques, and Dan certainly laid that out there as well. But he talked about Blake Purchase. He talked about Tatum Tuioti. He talked about the growth of Elijah Rushing. Okay, being able to rotate in a lot of these guys is going to, I hear that. And I'm very optimistic about what this pass rush could certainly be this upcoming season, and defensive line, like Bear Alexander, to Aiden Breland, to Terrence Green, to Teon Gray, to Amari Washington. There's so much depth in that room, and there's so much that can really come out of that room certainly as well. When it comes to versatility and when it comes to the pass rush, I would love to see at some point during this season, I would love to see a NASCAR package of sorts. You line up 4 guys in the defensive line on a big 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8, a clear passing situation. You can have Amari certainly, over the center or over the guard or something like that. But you've got Mateo, you've got Tatum, and you've got Blake Purchase all on the line of scrimmage. So you get that speed in a clear pass rush situation and you overload the offensive line. That's kind of what we're talking about with versatility. And we've seen that from Tosh Lapoy, certainly in this defense. You saw the bite there from Chris Hampton. And this is this is spring and even the early parts of fall camp. There's no depth chart. It's just, hey, let's throw guys out there into different situations. And the secondary is one. When you pull up a roster, or when you pull up any kind of online depth chart and you look at all of those defensive backs and you look at all of the talent, versatility is going to be the absolute name of the game for that secondary group. I could see a ton of these players. You continue to go down the list and I'm like, would like to see that guy out there. Got to see that guy out there. Do I really foresee this guy only playing in 2 or 3 games this year? I don't know. I look at the secondary right now, and it is going to be tough to keep a lot of guys off the football field. We all talk about Decorian Moore as being the fabulous true freshman, being in the mold of a Jeremiah Smith and a Ryan Williams in terms of production. And that certainly gets all the limelight. Offense is sexy. I totally get it. I think that there's a guy on defense that is also a true freshman. Going to be really hard to keep him off the field. Going to be really hard to keep Naeem Offord off the field. I believe that. I truly, truly believe that. You look at Jaleel Florence, like a track star like Rod Pleasant. You look at Aaron Flowers, like you kind of keep on going down the line, and whether it's been Tosh or whether it's been Coach Hampton, they talk about these guys that are coming in, like they have the size, they have the length, they have the speed, they have those traits that Oregon is looking for. No more 5'10" defensive backs. No more short defensive backs that can't cover in certain situations, that don't have the length to deal with bigger and longer receivers, certainly on the outside. When you talk about the different combinations, I think we could see a ton of different combinations. Like, I feel pretty strong that we're going to see Ife Obategwu at certainly one of the corners, but let's say the other corner is Theron Johnson. You've still got a guy in Jaleel Florence that's still a really good player. Why can't you slide Jaleel, and I'm sure they're doing this by rotating during spring practice, why can't you slide Jaleel to the nickel spot? Okay, you know, Dalen Austin we know is there. Jaden Kennedy has played that certainly at Ole Miss as well. Like, I think in the secondary, you're going to slide a lot of guys into a lot of different places. Like, you look at safety, you've got Kingston Lopa, who played a role certainly during the Big Ten championship game. Peyton Woodyard. You look at Flowers, like there's so many guys that I think you could see in so many spots. Maybe some of those safeties could play some reps over there at nickel. As I said before, some of these nickels could go over to corner. I think you're going to see a lot of rotation. And I think the hope is that these guys that are versatile in the secondary, you start to see that depth of talent certainly towards the end of the year. Depth and versatility, the Ducks have a lot of it. Man, what a ride the 2024 season was for the Oregon Ducks, coming into the Big Ten, their very first season, winning all 9 of their regular season conference games, of course, winning their 3 non-conference game, an undefeated 12-0 season, winning the Big Ten championship. It was an amazing season, no doubt, one of the best seasons in Oregon football history, but going back-to-back undefeated regular seasons would be quite the accomplishment. I'm going to talk shortly about the keys, what Oregon needs to do to go back-to-back undefeated seasons, but going 24-0 in regular season games in your first 2 years in the Big Ten would be a crazy accomplishment and really show exactly where Oregon sits in the upper echelon of college football right now. But before we get to that, we got to break down what the Ducks need to do in 2025 to be able to get that done as well. Number 1, work out the kinks during the first 4 games pre-Penn State. Like, the schedule in 2025 is very similar than it was in 2024. Of course, 2024, you had 5 games working up to a home game against Ohio State in the middle of the season. A little bit different this year. You've got those 4 games to work up to your 5th game going on the road to Penn State. After that game, you have a fairly manageable schedule, maybe some trap games on the road. Last year it was at Wisconsin. This year maybe it could be the first week of November when Oregon goes to play the Iowa Hawkeyes at Kinnick Stadium. The great Miss Frizzle once said on the Magic School Bus, "Take chances, make mistakes, get messy." The first 4 games of the 2025 season are as follows for the Oregon Ducks: Montana State, Oklahoma State, Northwestern on the road, and the Oregon State Beavers at home. We know about the inexperience. We know about the young players on this Oregon football team right now. This is a great opportunity to figure out which combinations work. This is a great opportunity to figure out which players work. This is a great opportunity to get these guys into game situations and say, hey, we have much more talented teams than all 4 of these teams right now. If we make a mistake here, if we make a mistake there, it's fine. We are talented enough to win a game. Like, you look at last year where they were figuring out the offensive line combination. Look at those games against Idaho. Look at those games against Boise State was a playoff team, for God's sake. Do I see a playoff team in these first four? No, I do not see a playoff team in all of those. But these first four games are going to be tremendously important for the young talent to be able to get that game experience and really figure out what it's like and to be able to work out some of these kinks before Game 5 when they take on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Let's talk about that game against Penn State. When you look at the Nittany Lions this year, of course, you got Aller coming back, but this is a powerful team. It's offensively, it is probably going to be a run-based team with no Tyler Warren out there, and the receiver position, I think, is a question mark out there for the Nittany Lions. But this is a physical football team. It's a defensive football team. Of course, with Knowles coming in as the coordinator, we know what this team's going to be. In game number 5, I think a key for them to going undefeated, and this, of course, being the big roadblock towards an undefeated season for Penn State, you need to show Penn State what speed is all about. Because we are more than 5 months away from this game taking place, but this is the ultimate battle of power versus speed. You need to show Penn State what Tracktown USA is all about. Because when I look at the speed on this team, when I look at DeCorian Moore, when I look at Evan Stewart, when I look at the matchup problem and the speed that is Sadiq, when I look at a guy like a Roderick Pleasant that runs track right now on the defensive side of the football, Oregon has a tremendous speed advantage, I think, in that matchup against Penn State. And they're going to need their offensive line to certainly be able to allow that speed to be on showcase as well. So I think that's a key as well, getting this offensive line to be able to gel together. But I think that goes into the first 4 games, working out the kinks and getting people to certainly get on the same page and develop that chemistry as well. But Oregon is going to be one of the fastest teams in college football, and that is going to be a showcase to see just how fast, just how explosive they can be against a team like Penn State. Winning another big midseason game, this time on the road, would give Oregon the confidence in this young team. I think they're going to build confidence throughout those first 4 games, but going on the road to Penn State and winning that football game, that confidence is going to shoot through the roof for some of these young players in the first half of this season as well. During the Dan Lanning era, this has been a team that has been ultra-focused. This has been a team when they take on squads that have less talented rosters, Dan Lanning takes care of business. This is not a team or Oregon that you really seriously put an upset alert a lot, because they are usually dialed in. They usually put their opponent in these types of situations at a disadvantage very early on, and they finish strong throughout a football game. Oregon needs to continue to dominate these lesser talented teams. Later on in the schedule, you're looking at Rutgers, you're looking at Wisconsin, you're looking at Iowa, you're looking at Minnesota. These are all teams that Oregon should be able to beat with a B performance at that point during the season. For them to go 12-0, kind of like last year, you need to continue to build on each performance. You need to keep on raising the bar. You need to keep on raising the standard. You need to remain focused one game at a time through this entire thing. You need to win. I think you can. This is a team, I look at it, that you can win in different ways. I think this Oregon team, like last year, I think they can win in a rock fight. I think they can win in a shootout. They can beat you any way they choose to beat you. One of my favorite sayings that I developed when I was covering the 2023 Michigan team. And this Oregon team last year, this year, it's the same type of deal. And when you in the back half of the season, continuing to dominate these lesser talented rosters and these lesser talented teams, I think should equal the Ducks playing their best at the end of the season. This is an Oregon team that is absolutely built to finish strong, and there's other things that I've touched on throughout this show that I think connect and really build up to the finish of this show right now. The end of the year in 2025 for the Oregon Ducks is going to see some of this young talent. Game 9, Game 10, Game 11, Game 12. Okay, I talked about earlier in the show, those first 4 games of the season before Penn State are imperative because you got to figure out the right combinations. You got to get these guys game experience. Hey, maybe even make a couple of mistakes. So at the end of the year, that these guys are playing their ultimate best. And I think because of that, the young talent with higher ceilings than that of the transfers. Like when you take a look at some of these transfers that you've had the last couple of years with Oregon, like they provide, I think, a higher floor to start, maybe a more consistent level of play, but they don't have that elite higher ceiling, I think, that we know that Oregon has with some of these recruited players right now. Like, you can't expect these young players to come right out of the gate and just know exactly what life is going to be like playing major college football, playing Big Ten football. As the weeks continue to tick by, as time continues to progress, this team is going to keep on building. This team is going to keep on getting better. This team is going to keep on getting better and better and better. The depth is going to be a huge piece to Oregon playing well at the end of the season. Okay? Getting these young players experience in a rotation throughout the season, whether they're second-team guys, maybe even going down to something like third-team guys. We've talked about before how deep some of these position groups are. It keeps the veterans or the starters that are playing, it keeps them fresh. So they're not being pounded game after game after game, and once you get to game 11, and once you get to game 12, they're wearing down when you look at, oh crap, we still got a conference championship game to go. We still got multiple playoff games to go. Staying fresh. Like, college football has altered. Coaches have had to alter the way they really approach the season. And Oregon, I think this year in 2025, is going to approach this thing where we want these young players really starting to blossom, really starting to flourish, and we want to keep our best players fresh. We want to keep Makai Hughes fresh. We want to keep Mateo Uiagalelei fresh. We want to keep Bear Alexander fresh. We want to keep Bryce Betcher, Dylan Tiedemann. All of these guys, we want to keep them fresh so that everybody's playing at the best level at the right time of the year. And then when you get to some of these teams towards the end of the season where they're not as deep, maybe they've suffered a few injuries, that's when Oregon can really start to flex their muscle. That's when they really mash down on the gas pedal. That's when really they are playing at their very best, entering the college football playoff, and then who knows what happens from there. The depth of talent, these rotations, these young players getting experience, and everybody being fresh and playing their best at the right time, I have a lot of confidence that this Oregon team, the way that this roster is built, could be playing chef's kiss type of football towards the end of the season. I would like to think that we ended this show strong here today. Spring football continues to wind down. We've got plenty more coverage coming up on TSOW. Thank you for being along for the ride. Until next time, I'm Ted LaRue. This has been That Show Out West.